Howdy everybody, David Minkin here, starting player with Connect More, and welcome to another awesome edition of Avoid the Rules, a video of instruction and demonstration that helps ease rule understanding and learning. Easy start, and today we're going to be featuring Lewis and Clark, the Expedition. Now, I have absolutely enjoyed my plays with Lewis and Clark. I look forward to putting it on the table every night. It has a lot of really interesting things I like in games, but more importantly, I love how this game comes up off the table, elevates itself off the table, and forces you to pay attention to what your neighbors are doing, and sometimes forcing you to manipulate and change your strategy or the timing of when you want to do things to maybe not be optimal, but to be able to kind of piggyback on some of the work of what your other colleagues are doing, your other players are doing. This will all make sense to you very shortly as I do the Avoid the Rules part of this video, so you can see exactly how this game works, what the mechanics of the game are, and maybe we'll talk a little bit of some of the strategies as you go along and some things that you can be doing while you're playing the game. So stay tuned for that, and at the end I'm going to give you a final thoughts and kind of tell you why I'm so excited about this game, why I like playing this game, and why I see myself playing this game a lot in the future. So stay tuned and enjoy. Alright, let's get started with Lewis and Clark, the Expedition. And as the name and the box cover would imply, you are going to lead an expedition team through the western United States, and you're going to explore new uncharted territories with you and your expedition team, and you're going to try to be the fastest person to do it, because it's not just you and your expedition team, there's other expedition teams here as well who are racing you all the way from St. Louis, the gateway to the west, up the Mississippi, over the mountains, through the gorge, over other mountains, and finally to Fort Clatsop, Oregon. And is between the races between you and the other expedition teams who are represented here by their playing pieces as well. And I've set up a 4-player game in this particular example. And so the winner of the game is quite simply whoever can get their entire expedition to Fort Clatsop and beyond, will become the winner, the first person that does that. So that sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? Well, let's look at some of the moving pieces within this game. I like to think of your expedition as being represented by 2 pieces here along the score track or the racing track, again, which is here represented by the river and the mountains all the way up to Fort Clatsop. First off, we have this little meeple, and he is your scout meeple, and he's pointing west because he only has one thing on his mind. I'm going west, I am charting new uncharted territory. So that's the first part of your expedition, and the rest of the people behind, your support crew, the people journaling things as you go, your mappers, these types of guys, they're basically represented here by this little tear-shaped symbol here, which is in the same your player color as well. So the reason why this is important is because you need both parts of your expedition to arrive or go beyond Fort Clatsop. Not just one is required. So you see that everybody here will start in St. Louis, and as the game goes on, you are going to move your scout up the river, and there'll be a time in the game which is called the encampment phase, but I'll talk about that in a little bit, where essentially the rest of your expedition is going to catch up to your scout. But it's not quite that simple. You may be faced with a few penalties along the way. If you have not moved your scout in an efficient manner and managed your camp in an efficient way, your scout may in fact lose time before the encampment phase before the rest of the camp will actually catch up. So you need to be very efficient with how you move upriver such that you don't lose too much time when it comes time to make camp. And so you're going to do this all your way up. You're going to, go on your way up, and other people will be piggybacking over top of you, and then finally away you go until finally both your scout and the rest of your expedition here, when you make camp, will arrive either at Fort Clatsop or beyond, and that is how you win the game. Pretty simple, right? Okay. Well, why don't we put these guys back to their starting area? We don't want to give the orange a head start. Well, that just wouldn't be any fun now playing with it. So we need to look at, well, what does our expedition crew look like? What kind of ragtag group of misfits did we wrangle up at the local saloon at St. Louis there? And how are we going to have any hope in heck in trying to achieve this lofty goal of ours? So first, why don't we look at what you start the game with? So every player starts the game with exactly the same thing. The first thing I'm going to point out to you here is your expedition board. And this essentially represents basically your fleet and what it's capable of carrying up the river. And so what you'll notice here is you're going to start the game with 3 of the basic resources, which are here. We have equipment, which is gray, we have fur, which is yellow, and we have meat or food, which is bison here and which is pink. So there are 4 basic resources in the game. You start with 3 of them. The other basic resource that you're going to find within the game that's also very helpful is the wood resource. But you know, these guys, they're resourceful lads. They packed an axe, they can get the wood as they go. So no problem there. So you're going to start the game with a couple boats available to you. And the first boat basically has 3 of these hexagon shapes, which represents any good, and it's full. You've packed some provisions. Good for you. You're ready to go. And then you have 2 other empty boats right now that are waiting to be filled that can basically hold more of these goods. So you see that this boat it's a smaller boat, can hold 3 more goods, and then you got a bigger boat that can hold up to 5 goods. Now, I'm not going to talk about this part of the board quite yet. I want to point you in this direction here and indicate this symbol here, which has a moon and a sun. That represents 1 day. Now, do you remember when I was talking about that encampment phase, where if you could lose time if you're not very efficient? This is where those symbols come into effect. I will explain that in more detail, but I want to point that out to you because if it's time for you to set camp and you have equipment on either one of these boats, you are going to lose time, and it may affect your efficiency of being able to move up. So whenever we see that, I'm going to point it out so that when we talk about the encampment phase, it'll make a little bit more sense and it won't be so unfamiliar. So accompanying you, you're going to have some Indians who are going to help you out along the way. So somewhere in St. Louis, good for you, you're able to find a local to basically help you out on your way, and he's got his own little canoe, and whenever you see a full enclosed circle like that, that means only 1 person can go in there. And the only meeples you have other than your scouts are these guys, your Indian meeples, or what I like to call them, your Sacagaweeples. So your Sacagaweeple would go right here, and then similarly you have other boats that are available for more Indians to be put in here. And whenever in the game you see this half swoop here, kind of this Nike swoosh, if you will, whenever you see that it's open-ended, that means it can hold an unlimited number of meeples, and you're also going to see that on the board game on the board as well. So but in this one, whenever you see the tight circle, it's just 1 person. But we see that we have this moon sun symbol again, which will maybe lose some time here if we're not very efficient with us. So everybody starts with exactly the same fleet of boats, an Indian to help them out, and some 3 of the basic goods. Now there is a variant where you can actually mix up the type of basic goods you're going to start off with. We're not going to show that for the case. We'll just start off with these 3 basic goods. So that's your fleet. But you can't have a fleet of boats with nobody to manage them or nobody to actually be on them. So that's represented here by your cards that you're given. Now everybody again in the game is given 6 starting cards to start the game, and they're indicated here. Now I should point out that the artwork on a lot of the cards is different in the starting decks, but that's okay because what's really cool about this game is they've actually gone and found real historically significant people, and they've honored them by putting them on these cards. And so by being able to mix up the artwork on all the different cards, they're able to honor more of the significant people who played a factor in the expedition and Lewis and Clark expedition. So I think that's really quite neat. I can look at these guys and you can go Google them, or there's also a really interesting write-up on a lot of the stuff in the rules as well. So I know this is avoid the rules, but don't avoid the awesome education that you can get from this as well. So definitely give that a read. So you're going to start off with a starting deck, and this is your crew. These are your ragtag guys that, you know, basically have been entrusted by Uncle Sam to go and explore the wild west. And your starting deck is always going to be represented here by, you're going to see a small little symbol in the bottom right hand corner. These signify the starting deck, and it's going to be matched the color that you have as well. Any of the other cards within the game will actually have a number associated with them, and that number is just so that you can look them up in the index and the rules, and then you can read more about that particular player as a historical figure, and as well as their game mechanics that they have in the game as well. So what we have here is we have our 6 cards, and their function for them is all the same, different artwork. 4 of these cards will allow you, or basically skilled people at acquiring any of the 4 basic goods that are in the game. And again, you've seen what the 3 of these goods look like. We have equipment, we have fur, we have wood, and we have food or bison. And so these guys are going to allow you to be able to get more of these goods by playing them, by activating them. So that's these 4 guys. And I'm going to explain how to do that in a little bit. Now the other 2 guys you have are slightly more powerful, And you have basically your commander, and this is the only guy that you start off with who gives you the ability to move your scout up the river. So whenever you see these icons where essentially you see little wavy, like a little pool there, that basically means you can move your scout up the river. So this refers to moving your scout. And again, your scout is this little meeple who's pointing west because he's an explorer, and now he's got a one-track mind. So the way that these cards work, whenever you see a slash, it's an or. You can do this or this or this. And the other way it works is you always read them vertically. So the cost of doing any one of these things is here you pay 1 buffalo, and it would allow you to move your scout 2 spots up the river. So if we were to take this example, and I'm yellow, I would take my scout and I go 1, 2, no problem. And so the rest, the rest of your team, they stay behind. This stays behind until a very particular phase, again called the encampment phase, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So similarly, you can also get what are called advanced resources, and I haven't talked about them, but I will. The 2 advanced resources in the game are a canoe and a boat. And essentially what these allow you to do is they allow you to be a little bit more efficient in your travel, as you'd expect in any kind of board game. And so here you can either use buffalo to move up 2 up the river, you can also use a canoe to move 4 up the river, or once you hit these mountain stages, and you recall there's 2 sets of mountains, there's one here and there's one there, you can actually use a horse and move through 2 spaces on through the mountains. So this is a very important card to have, because only through card play, and there's other cards, and you can see there's a whole deck of cards here, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that you can pick up throughout the game, but only through playing your cards can you move your scout up the river. So if I could give you advice, if this is your first game, you do not want to get rid of this card. You definitely don't want to get him. He's a powerful, powerful card. So that's your commander, and so he allows you to move up the river. And your other guy that you're going to start the game with is called your interpreter. And essentially this guy, he basically knows how to talk to the Indians. He knows how to wheel and deal with them, and basically gather them up. And so what he's going to be able to do is on the board, he's going to be able to basically pull off Indians and add them into your expedition. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So those are the 6 starting cards that everybody is going to get. And I haven't gone into a whole lot of detail of these cards because there's still a few things that I need to talk about how the heck do you actually play these cards. But now we're ready to go. We have our expedition, we got our boats, we got some starting equipment, we got an Indian, we got a crew of guys that can gather some resources, move us up the river, and interpret and negotiate with the local Indians. We are ready to go. So why don't I walk us through the gameplay right now, and we can figure out how the heck we're going to put all of this together. Okay, so let's get started with the actual gameplay. So as I showed you, we're going to start off with a crew of 6 guys. Now these 6 guys are pretty useless on their own. You cannot play a card all by itself. That will not accomplish anything and is actually forbidden within the game. You're going into new uncharted territories. You don't know where you're going. You don't know if there's going to be rogue Indian tribes waiting to get you right around the corner. So in order for you to actually accomplish anything in this game, you need to befriend the Indians and actually use them to help you accomplish what you want to do. So in order to play any card in your hand, is what you would do is, suppose I want to get more buffalo, I would put this card down and I would have to activate him with an Indian. So there's 3 ways you can do that. The first way you can do that is you'll notice that on the back side of every one of these cards there's actually a column here with space for 3 Indians. Now you're also going to notice that in this particular card, one of the Indians is actually already colored in. Well, this is referred to as the strength of the card. So now if I flip this over again, you'll notice this number at the top of the card, which I didn't talk about before. That tells you right at the front part of the card what the strength of this card is going to be. So that tells me on the back side that I have 1 Indian that I can actually use to power up another card or to accompany another card as he goes along on his adventure to go hunt some buffalo or do some fishing. So you'll notice that all of these cards that we start off with all have a number that indicates the power of them. And similarly, we got this card here, which is actually a power 2. Flip it over, you'll notice that 2 of the Indians are actually shaded in. And I'm going to explain the difference between these different powers. So let's go back to this example. I want to get some buffalo. So I would put this guy down, and then I can choose any one of the cards in my hand that have not yet been played and are not face up in my area. I can choose a card and say, I might say, you know what, I don't need a lot of fur right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this card, I'm going to flip it over, because it has a power of 1 and it has an Indian there. I'm going to use this Indian to accompany this guy as he goes fishing, and now what I've done is I've activated this card once. So that's how you play a card from your hand. But there's another way that you can actually activate your card. Suppose I really want this card. I need to go and I need to get some fur later on in the game, or later on in my turn, sorry, not in the game, but in this phase. I need some more fur, and I don't really want to give up some of these other cards. Well, what you can also do is you can actually take your meeple, your Sacagawea. You can take him and you can actually put him directly on the card, and this would activate your card once. And you can put up to 3 meeples on your card. You can activate your card up to 3 times. So that's the second way that you can actually activate your card, and then I would get some buffalo. And I'm going to show how you get your buffalo in a second. The third and final way you can actually activate a card is a combination of those 2 things. So I could take, again, this fur card. I don't want it. I'm going to flip it over so I can have this one Indian that's going to accompany me. I'm going to put it there. And then I'm going to take an Indian meeple, and I can actually put them in one of these vacant or non-colored spots. I could put them right in through there, if you can see that. And now essentially what I've done is I've used a combination to activate this card twice. And again, if I had another Indian, I could have put in there to activate it 3 times. So what does that mean? What does activating your card mean? Well, what this means is, let's take a little closer look at what the symbol is here. You'll notice that right below the buffalo, there are 3 arrows. There's one pointing to the left, one pointing to the right, and one pointing towards you. What this means is you get as many buffalo as you see buffalo symbols or signs on your neighbor to the left, your neighbor to the right, and in your own played faced up area. And what does a buffalo sign look like? Well, it's right here. It's this little symbol right here. And you'll notice that every card has a symbol or a color of it on some sort. So here you got buffalo, and then when I activated the card, this fur card, when I used the fur card to accompany my hunter, you'll notice that I also got another symbol up here. You count all of these symbols. So then in this particular example, since I'm the starting player, and I've activated the card twice, I look to my neighbor to the right. He's got no cards in his playing area. And then this is actually my hand, so I'll put that off to the side. I look to my neighbor to the left. He's got nothing in his playing area. I'm like, oh man, but it's okay because I count 1 pink area right here, 1 pink symbol here, and I've activated it twice. And for those people who are familiar with Lost Cities, think of these as basically your investment cards at the beginning of any of your expeditions. I know it's a completely different game, but all they are is directly a multiplier of what you're going to do. So normally, if this was the case, I only have 1 symbol, 1 Indian, so I'd get 1 buffalo. But since I've activated him twice, I've got 1 symbol, 2 Indians, 2 times 1, I get 2 buffalo. I would take that from the stock and I would add them to my boat, and it's that simple. Now, suppose now my neighbor decides, well, it's his turn to play and activate, and he sees that, hey, you know what, you got a buffalo card up there. I'm going to take advantage of that, and I also have a fur card there. Maybe what I can do is I can use that to my advantage. I need to get some fur. So what he'll do is he'll take his fur card here, and then he will activate it. Say he doesn't want any wood this time, so he'll take his wood card, flip it over so that I have an Indian to accompany my fur trader, and he'll play this face up in his playing area, and he goes, right, I only need to activate this once. And what he'll do now is the beginning, before he decides how much fur he's going to get, he looks to his neighbor to the right, and he looks at me, and he sees that I have 1 fur symbol already up there. So that's 1. He looks to his neighbor to the left. There's nothing in the face-up area. There's nothing there. Then he looks at himself, and he goes, right, and I also have a fur symbol right here. So there's 2 fur symbols, and I have 1 Indian to activate it. So 1 times 2 is 2. So I actually get 2 fur for my efforts. And so in this way, when you're playing the cards, especially as a way to gather resources, it's really important to see what your neighbors are doing and try to piggyback and time the time in which you're going to play the card appropriately, so you can take advantage of multiple symbols around you that will match what you're trying to get, so that maybe now you don't, in this particular case, the first player, he actually had to use a Sacagawea to get 2 buffalo, whereas in this case, I didn't need to activate any further because there's already 2 symbols up. So it was the same, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So that's one of the actions, one of what's called the compulsory actions in your turn, is to actually play a card from your hand, and that's how you would do it. The second compulsory action you can do in your turn is you can actually go and place a Sacagawea out here on the board. And the board here is, now I'm going to discuss this a little bit further, this is where the worker placement aspect of the game is. What I just showed you here, when you're playing your cards, this is hand management, deck building. We're going to talk about how you can actually add more characters to your deck and flush out your deck if it starts getting a little too weak for you. So you got that element of the game, and that's when you're playing your cards, it's timing it against what your opponents are doing and trying to piggyback off their efforts. And then in addition to that, you have here the worker placement part of the game, which allows you to basically build up your engine and get the materials that you need, again, so that you can move upriver. So the worker placement is your second compulsory action that you can take. And again, during your turn, you can only take one of the 2 compulsory actions. So you can either play a card or you can place a worker. You cannot do both on a turn, but you must do at least one. So why don't we go around and tell you a little bit about what's on the board. So again, when you look at the board, the top 3 spaces here are basically areas where you can just get more basic goods. You can get food or pelts, you can get equipment and wood, or you can get 2 pelts, or again, you got that dash line right there, or 2 woods. And you'll notice that the symbol here, the circle here, is a closed circle. So again, only one Sacagawea could go in there at a time, and then it's blocked. Nobody else can go there. But then you also heard me mention about these advanced goods, and they are indicated over here, over on the bottom left part of the board. And you have canoes, which are blue, and you have horses, which are white. And the way you get canoes is you simply would go here and you trade in 2 woods for a canoe. But you'll see that there's only a half swoop right here. So there's no limit on the number of Sacagawea you can put there. On your turn, you can place up to 3. So suppose I had some more Indians over here on my boat, and I want to go build some canoes. I could take up to 3 on my turn and actually place them in there. And then if on the next turn I want to do, and nobody's cleared this out yet, I can even add more meeples in there. It's absolutely unlimited. So you'll, again, you can tell that by these half circles right there. So that's how you get the canoes. And then to get the horses, you'll notice here that we got these hexagonal with a question mark in there. That basically means any resource. It can be any of the 4 basic resources, or even one of the advanced resources. But I don't know why you'd use a horse to make a horse, but you could use a canoe, for example. And you see the non-equal sign there. So basically 3 non-equal resources. So maybe you could do 1 fur, 1 equipment, and and here's my fur, and one bison or food. You could do something like that, and you would exchange that for 1 horse, and your horse would go onto your boat. So I guess you kind of got like Noah's Ark going up the river there. So that's how you get these horses. And again, you notice the half swoop. So you're unlimited to the amount of meeples that you go there. This is a newcomer space, so at the beginning of the game, you're actually going to put 1 Indian out on the board, and this is important, and I'll show you why in a second. And the other thing that I want to mention is during game setup, the one time that you're actually going to have to reference the rules is that there's a nice little chart right up here that shows you how many Indians that are actually used in the game based on the number of players. So make sure you respect that. That's the number of Indians that you actually put into the stock. And so I did that. I set it up for a 4-player game, so there's 15 Indians within the game. So moving along, now we go into the shaman's tent. And this is a really cool little area as well. And again, only 1 person can go there at a time. Now there is also a card in the game that has this exact same effect. So I'm going to, just for purposes of clarity, I'm going to show you the symbol on the card, and then it's the exact same symbol right there. So what the shaman's tent allows you to do, and again, we're going to read the effect and what you need to pay vertically along this column here, is you are going to pay 1 food or 1 buffalo. And you'll notice here that there's the circular arrow around here, and then you see this icon where basically shows 2 cards and a little Indian right there. Whenever you see that that symbol there, it basically means any cards that have been played face up that are still face up in front of any player around there, and that's what all these circular arrows mean there. So what you're able to do is by paying 1 food, you can take the power of any face-up card that has already been played and that is still face-up on the table, not just yours, but anybody on the who's playing the game. You can take advantage of their card and you get to do it. Now, I showed you how you can activate one of these characters 1, 2, or even 3 times. When you do this effect, you can only activate that card once. By paying this food, you get 1 activation of the card and that's it. But one thing I want to point out on this card is you notice that there's some arrows here on either side and in front of you. If you activate a basic resource card, you do not get to look at the relationship of the card that you're activating. You still look at your own relationship of cards relative to you. Now, I'm not sure that made much sense, so let me try to explain this a little bit further. Suppose this guy sitting across the way from me, sitting right over here, decides to put a meeple right here. He pays his buffalo and he goes, right, I'm going to activate this buffalo card right here in my playing area. Well, he can do that, but he does not get the advantage of the cards that are face up in this area and this area to count the symbols to see how much buffalo he would get. He would still look at the relationship of buffalo symbols from his own playing area to his adjacent neighbors. So I hope that that made some sense for you, and that's essentially something to keep in mind when you're actually playing either this card or activating this shaman's tent right here. Now, moving along, down here in the bottom right-hand corner, this is where we can expand our fleet. You know, this fleet that we starting off in St. Louis, it can be too small for some of you guys. You might just be bursting at the seams. So this is no problem. You can put a 1 guy here or 1 guy here. Now, on your turn, again, you cannot put 2 at the same time. You can only fill up 1 space, so you do that. And you can choose to buy 1 of 2 boats and of different sizes. So basically what you can do is, here's your 2 choices. You can either buy a boat that can carry Indians, and this little symbol up here would indicate that you get 1 Indian added to your boat, so good for you. And you would just take that and you just slide it along beside your expedition, just showing that you got a whole fleet of boats coming right up the Mississippi, exploring the West. Similarly, you can also get another boat to carry some more goods, here indicated by these 2 spots for goods. And when you do that, you would get 2 of the 4 basic resources of your choice, which is indicated up through here. But what if these puny tiny little boats are just too small for your expedition? Well, no problem. You could flip them over and you could actually get an Indian boat that could carry up to 3 Indians, and you get 1 provided that there's still 1 in the stock to actually jump in this boat. But again, we see this loss of time symbol here, so you got to be careful. If when you make camp, if there's anything left in here, you're going to lose some time. Similarly, you got a boat that can carry more goods right here. You're going to get 2 basic goods as well when you get this, but again, we got that symbol right there that you got to be aware of. So as long as you're planning accordingly, well then, yeah, that's not going to be a problem for you, but something to be aware. You have both of those options. So those are these extra boats you can actually add to your expedition. So that's pretty cool. And last but certainly not least, we have this little tent area right here. And this is an area where basically if you're starting to get fed up with your cards or things aren't quite working out for you, this is an area where you can essentially trash some cards from your hand. So what you would do is, if you have your hand, you're playing your cards and you realize some cards just aren't working out the way that you want to, you can trash up to 3 of these cards. Say you take these 3 cards and you just discard them and put them out of the game. You can choose to trash 0 cards, 1 card, 2 card, or 3 cards in that spot. That's the maximum you can do is 3. So why would you want to discard 0? Well, because the other thing that you actually do if you put a guy here is you get to clean out this entire card deck, which is called the Journal of Encounters. So you get to take all these face-up cards, wipe them clean, and then flip over new cards. And that might be important for you to do if you think there's something valuable that someone's going to take and you can't afford it, so you just want to get rid of it, or you don't like anything on there and you want to try something new. Now I'd like to flip over to the optional actions you have during your turn. There are 2 optional actions during your turn, and you can do them both during your turn, but only once. And again, what I'm talking about right now is actually summed up very nicely here in a little player aid that every player gets in their color. So you can read along here as well and make sure every player has one so that they're aware of what they can do during their turn. But these optional actions, the first one I'm going to talk about, because I've referred to it several times here, is this Journal of Encounters. Now the Journal of Encounters is essentially this deck here which is just composed of a whole bunch of cards of historic figures and people that you're going to meet along the way. And the way I think of this, I like the name of it, the Journal of Encounters. This is essentially, as you're traveling up the way, you're like, today I met, the Indian chief, and we worked together, we broke bread, and he helped me with finding wood or whatever it might be. And so that's essentially here. This is, you can imagine you being the leader of your expedition. These are people you're meeting along the way, and you're going to strike alliances with these guys or deals with these guys to kind of help you out. And so they might join your expedition, go the rest of the way with you, or they might just only help you out a little bit of the way. Now, these Journal of Encounters are always represented here by a handshake symbol, and you'll see that right there. I don't know if you can indicate. There's actually on one card here, whenever you see that, this is referring to these deals that you're making with these guys. So thematically, it really makes sense for me. Now, what you can do is you can actually go and basically pay one of these guys. Say, hey, we're making history here. Why don't you jump on board? And they go, well, hey, I really don't know you. Pay up. And the way you're going to pay up is there's essentially there's two costs that you're going to have to pay, two resources that you have to pay to get any one of these cards. The first thing it's going to cost you is going to cost you some fur. And the fur is just defined by its placement, the card's placement away from the deck. So this card is in 1 fur, 2 fur, 3 fur, 4 fur, and 5 fur. So this card here will cost you 1 fur. But in addition to that, it's also going to cost you some equipment to recruit these guys. Now, the equipment is a variable cost, and it depends on the strength of the card. So you remember that we're talking about the strength of the card can be anywhere from 1 to 3. And so here you see that all of these cards are strength 1, so they would cost you 1 equipment. So as an example, if we took this card, it would cost you 2 fur and 1 equipment, and you'd be able to purchase this card. Or not. I guess that sounds kind of mean. You'd basically be able to welcome this guy into your expedition. Whereas this card has got a strength of 3 and a 5 fur. So this would cost you 5 fur and 3 equipment, and you'd be able to recruit that person onto your team. Now, at the beginning of the game, you actually organize these cards when you flip them over in order of strength. So here I put all the ones, I just put that as I flip them over, and then I put the 3 at the end. So you just put these in numerical order. As these guys begin to get flushed out, then you just basically replenish your Journal of Encounters right next to the deck. You don't worry about reorganizing it anymore. You only organize it the very beginning of the game. Right. So some of this is pretty expensive. So, the 3 equipment, that might be pretty pricey to be able to come up with, 3 gray cubes through various methods and to actually be able to pay for this card. Well, there is one additional way that you can actually use your cards. So in your hand of cards, we've talked about the power that they have, the symbols that they have to help you gain resources. We talked about their strength. And when you flip them over, we talked about how they can actually activate or basically accompany other people of your expedition as Indians to help them move along. But you also notice that there is a little symbol down here, an equipment symbol. And you will see as many equipment symbols down here on this part of the card as the strength of your card is. So here your strength is 1, so you'll have 1 equipment symbol. And similarly, if your strength is 2, you should have 2 equipment symbols, and you do. You can use any one of your expedition, any people on your hand to essentially count towards your equipment cost when you're recruiting new people into your expedition. So it's essentially a way of getting rid of a card in favor of another more powerful card and kind of build up your deck that way. So as an example, if I was to choose this guy here, he has a strength of 1, I could use this card for its equipment effect here and actually pay for that equipment using this card. I would discard that from the game, and then I of course would pay the 4 fur, and then this card goes immediately into my hand. He doesn't go down in any kind of discard pile or anything. He goes immediately into my hand. And why is that important? Because your optional actions can occur anytime during your turn. So you might be able to do an optional action before one of your compulsory actions. And again, your compulsory action is playing a character or placing a worker. So if you want to play a character that turn, you can recruit them, and then you could play them right away. So you do an optional action and then your compulsory action. So that's just a really beautiful synergy to help you, continue working your engine on that during your same turn. So that is one optional action. Your second optional action that you can do is you can actually set up camp. And I've talked about this, I've alluded to it, but it's called the encampment phase. And essentially what you're going to do here is you are going to, throughout the course of the game, and as I showed you before, you are going to have, you'll have moved your scout up the river a certain number of spaces. And so let's just take an example here. Let's suppose I have something like this, and I maybe did that. No, we'll do it like that. Suppose I did something like this, and I've moved, oops, wrong guy, and I've moved my scout. We activated this guy, say 2 times. Suppose I did that, moved him up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, suppose this is a situation and I go, you know what, I don't really see a way of using these cards right now, I'm going to set up camp. And when you set up camp, this is the moment where the rest of your expedition, represented here by this little tear-shaped piece, can actually start making progress up the river. This is the only time that this piece will move. Well, you hope that it moves if you don't get penalized too much. So when you say you're going to set up camp, the very first thing that you're going to do is you're actually going to take any Indians that you may have had. Suppose this Indian was over here because I helped power this up a second time. You take any Indians that you have play on your cards and you return them back to their boats. So that's the first thing that you do. So you return all your Indians here on your cards back to your boat. So here you might be noticing like, wow, so if I play a card, if I play Indian meeples or Sacagawea here to activate my cards, they always come back to my expedition. They stay with my expedition. That is absolutely true. If you play Indian meeples out here, or Sacagawea out here, you lose them. They will stay out there. They are gone. You have to use another action to actually get them back, or hope that you can get them back. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to move this guy back here. The second thing you do is then you look at the rest of the cards you have left in your hand. And you notice here I've got 2 cards. Now if we flip them over, you'll notice that these cards, oh man, they also got the moon and the sun symbol on them. This means when I set up camp, I lose 1 day for each guy I didn't use. So I lose 1 day for this guy and 1 day for this guy. That sucks. So then what you do is I'd move my scout back 2 days, 1, 2. So he moves back 2 days. Then I go look at my expedition board and I look to see if I have any other penalties that I have to pay. So you'll notice that on this boat here, it has basically just the moon and the sun symbol. And here if you have a good or 3 goods, it doesn't really matter, but any good in here or any number of goods in here, you would lose 1 additional day. So as an example, suppose I had, let's just do a quick example like this. So here I would lose 1 additional day because this boat actually has some goods in it. So there goes back my scout again. Then I go over to this boat and I notice that I have, and just to make it interesting, let's do this. We'll go back to this boat and now you see that I got this symbol plus basically a random resource symbol next to it. That means I lose 1 day for every resource on here. Oh, I did not plan this well at all. So what this would do is I would lose 3 additional days, 1 day for each resource. So my scout would continue moving backwards. So he'd go 1, 2, 3. Wow. So that's all the ways that you can actually lose days. And you can see that I was absolutely not efficient at all in moving my scout. So my scout moved up, but the rest of my camp, they just lazed around. They were renegotiating their terms of their contracts and what they were going to provide. They became big and bulky, so they lost a lot of time moving gear back and forth. All of these things, you can put it in any way, thematic sense that makes sense to you. But what it's done is it's moved my scout way past the camp. Now, one thing I want to point out is your camp can never move backwards. So if this case should happen and your scout moves back here, well then you just got more work for your scout to move up in your next turns, but your camp would stay here. It never moves backwards. Now suppose you and your neighbors are doing a really poor job and you've moved back 5 spaces from St. Louis, and there are 5 spaces here. This is one of the spaces where you actually are allowed multiple scouts in one area. And again, you see here this really faint kind of half circle here, that's what that represents within the game. And I'm going to talk about the scout movement in a little bit, but I just want to point that out. So it's no problem. So, and that's as far back as you can go. And then eventually, hopefully you can move your scout forward. But suppose in this example, my scout did stay forward. I did an excellent job. I was very efficient. I used all my characters. I used all of my resources. Let's put these back. I was able to use my resources efficiently. and my scout was up here, then in that case I would move my camp up to that point right there. And again, now my camp can never move backwards from this point. There it will always be. And I guess that makes sense, because if your scout goes buggering off and you can't really make it up the river that much, these guys are just sitting back, not doing much. They obviously got lots of provisions. No worries, they probably just set up a new town. So we'll call that, yeah, I don't know, there'll be a new town there. So anyhow, that is your encampment phase. That is your second optional action that you can take. And again, your optional actions can be taken at any time during your turn, provided that you always have to take one compulsory action. The other thing with your encampment phase is that's the time when you actually pick up these cards that you've been playing throughout your various turns, your previous turns before that. So you pick up your cards and you bring it all back into hand, and now you're ready to reuse these different abilities or different cards again. And what makes this so interesting for me is you can tell that, you know, if people are recruiting characters at a different pace, and they're getting maybe more characters than you are. Some people are going to build up big expeditions, and because they're going to have big hands, they're going to have to play all of their characters so that they don't get a big delay at the end when they want to take up encampment phase. Whereas other people might have a really lean deck and they might only play a couple characters and they're ready to set up camp again. And so in this way, each expedition and each player is able to basically define their own phase, their own arc of play, if you will, because whenever you do the encampment, that's essentially like you resetting and starting a new round, but you're doing it independent of what other people are doing that works for them. So whatever engine, whatever style of play that works for you, you can tailor that and try to do it in such a way that you're building synergies with the people around you without them building as good of a synergy with you. So that's a really quite cool thing that I like about this whole encampment phase and how it all kind of comes together at the end. So those are the actions that you can do. Now, I haven't talked about a few of the special kinds of things, and I'm going to talk about that right now. I told you about how you can actually put your Indians out here and actually have them activate things for you and actually get resources for you. Well, suppose people are doing this, you'll notice that the board starts getting filled up. Now, you can't do anything here. Suppose people built some canoes, maybe somebody was over here. And again, these are meeples that people have been placing throughout the turn. Well, the way you can actually get these Sacagaweeples back is by playing your interpreter card. And this is a card in your starting deck and is represented here. Now, what you see here is you see a picture at the very top of what's called the powwow area. And that's this area right here in the center of the board. So if you were to activate this card, and again, you would activate them like any other card. So you could activate them like this, and you play them face up in your face area. You would take all of these Sacagaweeples and you put them all into the powwow area. At this point in time, you can actually take all of them if you want and go put them onto your expedition. You can go add them onto your boats, or you can choose to only take, say 3 or 2, however many you want, because as you're starting to see now is that when you're playing this game, if you have too much of anything, when you make camp, it's actually going to work against you. You've made your expedition too bulky, too cumbersome. It's just a big, ugly machine rolling around. It's not being very effective at all. So there becomes this planning that you need to do when you're actually taking these guys, going, well, how many do I really need that by the time I make camp, it'll actually be an efficient camp. But you put them all in this powwow area, so that way if you don't take them all the rest of the spaces are actually in fact clean. So that's how you actually get Indians back into your expedition if you've been putting them out here. And of course, the other way you can get Indians is by buying these boats where you get an Indian there as well. Now, the last thing that you can also do, and I forgot to do this the first couple games I always played, you'll notice that here on this Journal of Encounters, you'll see an X through the final card. So this is another way, this card not only kind of resets the worker placement area out here, but it also helps move along the cards as well. So you take this bottommost card and you slide all the cards this way and you flip over this card. And then you trash this card from the game. So that's another way that you can actually kind of clean up the board and kind of move things along. And so I want to point out that when you do this, provided you have more Indians within your stock, another Indian's going to come to the newcomer area. He's like, hey guys, I'm new in the area. What's going on? You know what's happening up here? And so he comes into the newcomer area, new to the village. Now, one thing that I really like about this game is you could continue to suppose we'll go back to the original scenario, and suppose I activated this card twice. So what you can do is, and this guy was back here, so if I activated the card twice and all of these guys are back in their spots, then I would swoop them all up, put them into the powwow area. I take all of these guys and I put them into my expedition. Then I take a new guy and I put him onto the newcomer area. But through one activation, you have to activate the entire thing before you repeat the activation. So I've done all of that, but I still haven't trashed this card. So I could trash this card, swoop them all down, do this, and then I would activate him a second time. Now this Indian goes here, and I could swoop him up, and then we get rid of this card, and away he goes. And this I find is a really powerful way. If you see a card up here that's actually quite expensive, and you want to get that card, you can maybe activate this guy several times and move that card down to a price that you can actually afford, and then you could get it. Or if you see a powerful card but you just don't have an ability to get at it, you could actually do, this is a way that maybe you're not interested in getting the Sacagaweepos out here, but you just kind of want to move some things off the Journal of Encounters, and this is a way that you can actually do that by multiple activations. Now, one thing I want to point out as well about multiple activations is you can activate anything multiple number of times, but you cannot use the resources or any benefit that you acquired from the first activation as fuel or to trigger the second or third activation. Or similarly, you can't use things from the second activation to trigger the third activation. So you need to have everything up front for the number of times that you can activate it. And these always represent the maximum number of things that you can get. You never have to take all of it. It just represents the maximum number of things because, again, you need to be efficient in your planning for what you want to do. So that's how you get these guys from the area. Let's go talk about the scout movement, because there are a few special little things that you also need to consider when you're moving your scout. You'll notice that this track or this river is really narrow. And honestly, this is the one thing about the game that I just do not like. I don't like this track, and the reason why is if I'm sitting far away, I've played several 5-player games, I have a really hard time seeing this little white dashed line through there. And it becomes very important sometimes to be able to count when you're planning, count how many spaces your scout is going to move, and sometimes I have a hard time seeing that. So the reason why they make it this narrow is because only one scout can accompany or occupy, only one scout can occupy one space at any one time. So suppose I moved my yellow scout up here and he's getting ready to go again, and now it's blue's turn and he's able to move his scout, say 4 spaces. He would go 1, 2, 3, 4. He's now on top of the yellow scout, which you can't do. So since he's moving forward, he slides forward into the next vacant spot. And so that's a really cool way that you're able to actually get extra movement. If you're able to time it right, that you can basically slide over top of other scouts into another spot. But beware, if you're making camp and you start losing time, and suppose the blue guy in this particular case loses one day while he's making camp, he would go back one day, and again now he's on the same spot that yellow's on. He can't stay there, and since he's moving backwards, he continues to slide backwards into that spot, so effectively he would have lost 2 days. So that's one thing that another element to this game that will just start making your brain burn a little bit, going, my goodness, how can I that guy is a perfect place for me. Maybe I can piggyback off him and slide up a couple extra spots. That would be great, because then that saves me actually having to play a card or use resources to move that much further up the river. Now you'll notice that most of this at the beginning of the game is indicated by these river symbols, but then you get into these mountains. And so when you get into the mountains, you can only move through cards that allow movement through mountains. And I showed this to you earlier in the walkthrough or the demonstration here. But in the first set of mountains, the beginning and the end of the mountains, you'll notice that there's both, in one space, there's a mountain and water symbol. There you can use either or. You can, once you get into here, you can start using mountain symbols to travel, or you can continue using water symbols to travel, and then getting out of the mountains, you can do that as well. But once you get to here, the mountains are a little bit more steep, the cutoff is a little bit more harsh. You have water, and then directly into mountains, and then back directly into water. So you don't have that same gradational change that you have there. So the really interesting thing about this is just as soon as you think you got a good engine going, you know, you're moving upriver, everything's fine, you hit the brakes and you hit the mountains. If you haven't been thinking about the mountains along the way, then you got to basically rebuild your engine and figure out how you're going to scramble over these mountains. And once you've done that, then usually by then you've kind of figured out how to move through water and mountains, and then it's a mad dash for Fort Clatsop, and away you go. So that is the essence of how the Scout moves. Some final things that I want to show you, and then you're ready to get going, is I've just picked out a few of these more interesting cards just to again show you some of the symbology and get you familiar with maybe some of the things that you can do with them. Now in the game, there are 2 cards that have this 1 times on them. That means that no matter how many times you activate the card, so suppose I activated him with this card, and you can again over-activate it, doesn't matter. Even though I've activated him twice with these 2 Indians here, I only get to use his benefit once, and there's 2 cards like this. And the way his benefit works is for, you look at the symbology here again, is that for as many face-up cards that I have played, here's the arrow pointing at me, then I get to take up to 4 basic goods that are non-equal basic goods. So if I had 4 face-up cards in front of me that I've already played, when I play this card, then I get to take 1 of all 4 basic goods. So there's only 1 other card like this, and his ability lets you take the same good with the same effect on there. You can only do that once. Now, the other thing I want to point out are these cards here. There's another really cool symbol here, this infinity symbol. Now these guys here, when you actually play them, you have to play them like any other card. So if he was in my hand, I would, as one of my compulsory actions, I could actually take him and I could activate him here. I could activate him here in my face-up area. When I do that, he does absolutely nothing for me. He just sits there and he's ready. Basically, you said, okay, buddy, you're up, get in the batter's box, you're ready to go. And then on your next turn, should you do anything where his effect will assist you, well then you'll get the added benefit of what he has for as long as he's face up in your player here. And that's what these infinity symbols mean. And basically what this guy, he allows you to do is if you choose to move your Scout upriver or through the mountains, when you're counting your movement spaces for your Scout, he hops over any other Scout that's in front of him. And so by playing him at the beginning or up front, then any movement that is subsequent to that, while he is still face up, you get to take that benefit. So that's it. There's other little symbology in here, and like any game, the first time I saw it, I'm like, oh my goodness, these symbols just don't make any sense. And now after playing this game, many times, I look at the symbols and go, yeah, of course, that makes total sense. And it's like any game like that for me. When I first look at the symbols, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But then as you play the game and you get immersed into it, then you go, well, yeah, that was the perfect symbol to use. I don't know why I was so confused the first time. So that is what you're going to do. And again, just as a recap, the winner is going to be the first person to get their entire expedition to Fort Clatsop or beyond, and that includes both your Scout and then when you make camp, to be able to keep your Scout on the west side of the finish line here so that your camp will be either here or beyond. And when that happens and the game wins, the game ends immediately, and that person will be remembered for years to come, be written about in history books, and they'll play games about him many years later, and he'll be revered for generations to come. Or perhaps he will just have bragging rights until the next game's night, whichever you prefer. So stick around for my final thoughts. I hope that this made some sense to you and was not jumping around too much, and hopefully we can discuss why I like it and what it reminds me of. Stay tuned. Thanks. Whoa, so welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was all very clear. If it wasn't, please leave a comment down below and let me know if something wasn't very clear. I'd love to clear it up for you. Or if you think that maybe something was not as you've interpreted the rules, let's have a discussion and make sure that we're all very clear on that as well. I've gone through a lot of the different literature out there, the facts for Lewis and Clark. I think I've got it. The one thing I forgot to mention during the video, and I'm going to mention it to you right now, is you can never throw goods overboard, with one exception. When you are getting new goods, or say you're making camp and you realize, oh no, I got way too many goods, too bad, you got to live with it. You can't throw it overboard. It is stuck on your boat. The only time you can actually throw something overboard is if you are receiving more goods, you've done some action that allows you to get more goods, and all of your boats are full. Then you can actually exchange goods for the new goods in which you've received. You're allowed to do that, but at the end of the day, you would have started with a full boat, and you'll end that turn or that action with a full boat. So you're not actually you're not lightening the load, so to speak. You're just exchanging the load. So that's one thing I didn't discuss in the avoid the rules. So I want to make that clear before we get started. Now, let's get on with my final thoughts. Why do I just absolutely love this game? I'm really enjoying my plays with this, and I see that lasting for a long time. Well, I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb. I'm going to tell you about another game that I really enjoy playing that is absolutely a classic game. And by me making this comparison, some of you may agree and some of you may really disagree. But I'm not talking about mechanics. I'm not talking about theme. I'm not talking about anything else. I'm talking about the way this game makes me feel when I'm playing it. And do you know what this game reminds me of? The way it makes me feel is this game right here, Power Grid. Now, Power Grid is just an awesome game. It is a classic game, and I'm sure many of you right now are going, oh my goodness, you can't be talking about these two games in the same breath. But I'm going to tell you why. Is in Power Grid, you have different phases which are indicated by the turn track. And like Lewis and Clark, in Power Grid, you're essentially racing to become the person to power up the most cities. So I don't consider Lewis and Clark at all a racing game. Like, it's told a racing game. I mentioned it as being a racing game at the beginning of my video, but I don't feel that way. I feel that scoring track is simply that. It's a scoring track, and then the mountains and the river basically are ways for you to basically gear your strategy as the game progresses. You're like, right now, moving up to the mountains, I got to change my engine a little bit. I have to adapt to that. I'm going to gear my strategy. I'm going to move forward. And you're essentially entering in a different phase. Well, similarly, Power Grid is not mentioned as a race game. It's basically a scoring track, and by getting to different cities, number of cities that are actually being powered up, you're entering in different phases, and those phases basically open up the board for you, and they allow you to get into different cities, and they open up the different cities, and it changes your thinking. You start planning for that phase in advance. You see someone moving up, like, right, the next phase is about to trigger. The game is going to change a little bit. I'm going to maneuver my way down here and get into this part so that I can actually start, powering some of these cities over there. If I can get into a foothold there, then I'll be good to go. And you start thinking about that in advance. Similarly here, you see that the mountains are coming up. You see that the phase, your engine is going to have to change a little bit, and it's going to change the way you're thinking, your strategy going up to that. So in that way, I find them similar. The other way that I find similar here is at the beginning of Power Grid, at the beginning of your turn, you have the auction for the different power plants. Money is so tight in this game. So you're sitting there and everyone's kind of counting your money, going through it all, going, right now, so if I can get that power plant, the maximum I can bid for that one is this, because if I can get that, then I see that it's oil powered, and I'm looking over there at the oil, the oil market right now, and I could pick up 3 of those so I can power that. And you're doing a lot of that, and you're calculating the amount of money that you need for every step along the way well in advance. You're kind of planning out your entire turn so that you don't run short on money, because there's nothing worse when it's finally time to get some cities. You're like, I got $9 and I need 10, and we've all been there. And so you spend a lot of time trying to manage your turn. Well, that's the same with Lewis and Clark. I find with Lewis and Clark, when you've reset, basically you've done the encampment phase and you've reset and you pulled all your cards back into your hand, you're sitting there and you can't take just one action by itself. Sometimes you capitalize on something so that you can take advantage of what your neighbors are doing, but you can't really do that because for a good example, suppose you need to use one card to power or activate the other card to use it for the Indian, and then you realize now that that card is down and it's played, you can't use it until you make camp again. You're like, oh no, I really needed that card. That was just bad planning, and you need it maybe 3 turns from now. But too bad, so sad it's there. You can't make camp, or you might lose too many days, and you go way backwards. So then you're kind of stuck with that decision, and it just kills you. You're like, okay, well, how do I get that card back? How do I get back into this game? And so I find with this, even though the mechanics are different, you're still doing this kind of full phase planning is the best way I can describe it. Is where here your phase that you're basically, each player decides how big of a phase they want to make. If you think of a phase as being when you're starting with a full hand of cards to moving to your encampment phase, well, that's going to vary for everybody. So you need to almost plan that entire phase or have a loose feeling of what you're going to be doing with that entire phase to make sure at the end that you don't have a bunch of excess, that you don't have extra goods, you don't have extra Indians, you don't have extra players in your hand, because all of that's going to cost you time and move you backwards. So in that sense, I find that the planning that I'm doing for both of these, I find that this planning seems to be a little bit longer term, more turns involved as opposed to, say, this planning. But I'm still having that same kind of brain burn forward thinking for the planning in both of these. And I just don't feel that this is a racing game. To me, when I sit down and play this game, I get the same feeling, that same burn, that same intensity as if I'm playing Power Grid. But what's really cool about Lewis and Clark is I'm using some slightly different mechanics. Lewis and Clark, I get to do a little bit of deck building, and honestly, I'm not a huge deck builder fan. Like I like seeing things move on a board, and that's what's great about this is you get to build your deck, you get to make it efficient, you get to add characters into your deck, and then you can get rid of cards that you don't feel are really doing much for you, that are slowing you down. So I like that, but it's fairly minimal, so you get to actually do that. So it incorporates that, and I love worker placement, and then you get to actually do the worker placement. And what's really cool about this worker placement is how you get your workers back, because if you put your worker out there, well, then you got to actually play a card. You got to have proper hand management to be able to play your interpreter card and get those guys back, where they're just gone. And I've played some games where they're gone. I just can't get them back, and it just drives me nuts. I'm like, oh man, I need some of these guys. I don't feel like I'm powering up, and then I'm using cards to power other cards, and then I end up using cards that I want to use, and I've said that way too many times, but what I'm doing is I use cards to power up for Indians instead of using them for their actual effect, but it depends on how you're playing. But I've found that I really like that mechanic, that kind of pullback mechanic as well. So Lewis and Clark, for that, I love the integration of those mechanics, and in addition, I like how a lot of the card's effects is dependent on what your neighbors are doing. When you're trying to get basic resources, you got to look at what your neighbors are doing, because if they have lots of those little symbols out for you, well, then you can kind of jump on that and really take advantage of their cards out, of having all their cards out, and there is a certain advantage to this. Now, some people argue, well, then if you're a starting player, you kind of get hosed because you can't really do much, and so whatever you get is just whatever you have. You don't have the advantage of your neighbors around you. But then if you read in the rule books, they say, yeah, but since it's a sudden death, whoever gets there first with both parts of their expedition wins, well, then the advantage goes back to the first player. Well, you can debate that if you want. I'm not going to get into it. All I know is I have a great fun, and over the course of the time that I'm playing it, no big deal. Now, in keeping with the mechanics and with what your group are doing, I also really enjoy how I guess it's almost how the catch-up mechanism, but not really, because it can screw you the other way. So take that back. But I really enjoy how your scout can move, because that also influences your timing. And I love games that force you to change your timing and change your rhythm, based on what everyone else is doing. And I really like how it's integrated that into the game, where you can actually slide on top of other scouts. Now thematically, you're going to hear, well, this doesn't make a lot of sense, because if you get some scouts lining up in the mountains, you can basically row your canoe real fast up towards the mountains and just kind of slide off them, and Dukes of Hazzard blaring in the background, just kind of land up on a mountain pass somewhere. And I guess that's possible. That thematically, we've debated my game group, well, what does that mean? So the best explanation I can come up is, well, you know what, maybe the first crew, they got in there, they slashed down some trees, they kind of set the trail, maybe they went up some pass that didn't quite work, they had to come back and kind of go up, and you're able to kind of truck along and go, hey, great, we'll just follow the path, and away you go. So maybe so it's just easier for you. That's maybe I'm stretching, but that's how in my mind I resolved it thematically. So will Lewis and Clark and Power Grid, will one replace the other? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm just saying that I have similar feelings, and I feel as excited about playing both of these games for the reasons that I mentioned. But in terms of mechanics, here we got worker placement, and we have kind of deck building, card building. But when you get to Power Grid, you have the auction, and I love auction games. So just for that reason alone, this will stay there. And the other thing I really like here is the resource market that you have, and that's something that's not really in here. It's part of your planning, and it's a part of your interaction with other people. So here again, you also have that interaction with people where you're seeing, well, they got that power plant, they're probably going to go after that resource, so maybe I should go for here. And you're trying to kind of calculate what other people are doing, and that might influence your turns as well. But they're obviously completely different games, and so therefore I recommend both. But I'm just trying to convey through my Lewis and Clark discussion what the game feels like, because I imagine most of you who are watching this video are maybe trying to decide on Lewis and Clark, but have played Power Grid. So that's why I'm using it as a bit of a jumping point. But I'm sure some of you will jump all over me. Okay, go for it. That's fine. This is how I feel, so I'm going to talk about it. So that's Lewis and Clark. Would I recommend this game? Absolutely. Except one thing I should warn you about is the play time for this game is roughly 30 minutes per player, and that's proven to be true in all the games that I've played. In all the games I've played, there's always been some beginners, some new people to the game. So I played a couple 5-player games, and that gets long. Like, I was totally into it. It's doable. It's fun. I have no problem doing that. But some people, if they're under a time crunch and you start with rule explanation and beer and pretzel chat and whatever else you got going on, you're going to be 2.5 to 3 hours depending on how relaxed your group is. And my group likes to chat a lot, so it's going to be a long haul, especially if you're all learning it. But the great thing is, everyone I've played it with has been so immersed into the theme, and like with the different characters that are all colored there, and some of the people were actually quite historic about it. They're like, oh yeah, well, on our travels we went saw this and this guy did that, and then in the rule book there's a little brief blurb on there, and you can kind of look at that. Or if you have the advantage of playing with someone who's really well versed in this historic time, they can give you all kinds of background flavor. So if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I absolutely love games that promote discussion. That's why I play games, because I want discussion. So whether we're discussing the game or aspects of the game, it just doesn't matter to me. I just want discussion to be occurring while we're playing. I don't like those games where everyone's just staring at the board. I lie. Ricochet Robots is awesome. But other than that, I like the discussion that goes on. So the cool thing about this is you got the discussion about all the parts of the game going on, but you also have people who know more about the history, and it's a really good discussion point or leaping off point. So I'd also really highly recommend this to, I don't know where in school you learn about this or what grade, but this is a great leaping off point for a lot of those discussions, especially the way that they've done the characters. And of the 5 expeditions, 2 of the commanders, one is Lewis and one is Clark, and I think that's pretty cool, and there's a few other ones in there as well. So for all these reasons, I'm really looking forward to my next play of this. I was actually a little bit bummed that I had to make the video. No, I'm just kidding, because I'd rather be playing this one right now. No, I'm absolutely kidding. This video, the reason why I made it, because mechanically it's a very simple game to play, but there's just a few little things go, oh yeah, that's right. And it's the type of game where those small little nuances of the rules make a difference in your strategy, and that's why I think doing this video was important, and it was important to me, so I can go back and review it, is just knowing, you know, for example, when the scout's moving up the river that he can't land on another scout, well, that's going to change your strategy, right? Just knowing that when you play the what's his name, the shaman's tent, that if you're going to use a basic resource, you don't use the basic resource and the relationship of the person whose card you've activated, you still use your own resource. So there's a few little kind of gotchas that are going to change your overall strategy. So that's why it was important for me to do this video. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you tuning in to watch this video. And if you enjoyed this, please come check me out on Facebook, Connect More Board Games, or subscribe to the YouTube channel. Or I'm even working on a webpage right now, www.connect-more.ca. It's under construction right now, but go ahead and bookmark it, because we'll have lots of good stuff there once it's up and running. That's been one of my other projects I've been working on here. So again, I really appreciate you taking the time. If you think that there's any other thing that I missed or that you'd like to see covered, or you don't feel that this is a fair comparison, well, you know, let's hear your thoughts, and I look forward to reading them. So until next time, I hope you guys have an excellent time gaming, and I hope that you guys will see this video in time to take advantage of the big new print run that they're doing. I think there's 10,000 copies due to be released into the wild here soon. So hopefully this has made you make up your mind about whether or not this game is right for you. So until next time, I'm David Minkin, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.